That's good. Now you're ready to go. Touch any buttons.
All right, everybody take their seats, please. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Daryl. I am an alcoholic. At this time, we will introduce our next speaker. Her name is Sabrina Z from New York City.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm an alcoholic. My home group is A Day at a Time in Astoria, Queens. You are welcome to come. We meet Saturday mornings at 10:30. We have a step meeting and a beginner's meeting. My sober date is March 12, 2004. I am sponsored and I have sponsees, and the more I get sober, the more I realize that it's kind of the same thing and very interchangeable, and I have the pleasure of walking shoulder to shoulder with other women and men in this program with the humbling of my ego that God has done. So I used to yell at sponsees a lot when I first started working with them when they didn't do what I wanted them to do. And that has gotten a little bit better, they might tell you. So anyway, I tried to get out of coming here. So I am living a charmed life. I flew in from South Africa on the red eye. I landed 7 a.m. on Tuesday because I have a job where I am reliable and valued. I went right to work to help out because I hadn't been there for a while, and I'm very tired and I have things going on and I haven't done errands, and I get a text that there's like a change with speakers. Hey, we'll have you do whatever step, whatever. And I'm like, ooh, loophole. Do you need me to come? Right? Like maybe I don't have to come to Pennsylvania. And he said to come. He said that there were a few women in the room, and there are actually a lot of women in the room, and I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad that I came, and I'm glad that that people protect me from the loopholes that I try to find. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and if you know a little bit about my alcoholism, which is probably similar to yours, you'll be surprised that I even try to find loopholes, right? That coming here is even like a burden for an alcoholic of my type, right? A real alcoholic who absolutely, under any condition, could not stop drinking for the life of me. I damaged everything that I touched. I hurt every single person that came near me. I could not hold a job for longer than a year. I got arrested frequently. Tons of anger issues. I identify a lot with the steps 6 and 7, right? The removal of those character defects. That beast still lives inside of me, and I'm very aware of it. And yet I'm like, no, I really need to catch up on Netflix and pizza and not drive to Pennsylvania to speak on these steps, right? So I belong here. I was introduced to AA for the first time when I was 17 years old. I was put in charge of the keg at a church picnic. I have a physical allergy. I believe that I can handle it, and I cannot handle it. And I take one drink and I cannot stop drinking, and I am absolutely embarrassing myself at this church picnic. And my mom's friend went up to her and said, hey, I'm in AA. Do you want me to bring your daughter to a meeting? She brought me to my first meeting. I had a drink to go to the meeting. I don't know how anybody walks into a church basement without a drink in their body, right? So if you smell alcohol in an AA meeting, don't act so shocked. I wound up getting sober 9 years later. So someone planted the seed for me when I was 17 years old. I was in and out of AA for 9 years, where I believed that I could still figure out a way to do it on my own. I heard every single person I came in contact with. I stole, I lied, I cheated, I did anything to get another drink, to get what I needed to feel better about myself. I believed that I could figure out a way to control it if I eat more. Everybody used to say that, like, you have to eat more. You have to eat, right? Your problem is you don't eat, like as if lack of bread was my dilemma, right? Like if I just ate more bread, then that beast would stay tamed, right? If I do more yoga, if I get the man, if I get the job, right? It was like a million things. If I could just figure it out, right? More about alcoholism. Go read more about alcoholism. It's the first chapter I ever identified with. If I could just figure it out, then it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. Because not drinking is not an option. It's not an option. And I know so much about alcoholism now, but all I knew then was I could not stop drinking, and I didn't even really want to stop drinking. I just didn't want the consequences, right? I didn't want to wake up in jail, and I didn't want to lose the job, but I didn't want to not drink. Drinking actually was a solution, right? It made me feel good. I wanted to be out of my mind all of the time. I wanted to be in oblivion all of the time, if only everybody would leave me alone. And a lot of that, right? So just all of these years of like trying and feeling really bad and coming into AA and identifying with people and feeling like, okay, well, maybe I belong here, but actually my story is a little bit worse. I hurt my mom more, I caused more damage, I've done worse things, and they don't really know. And if they knew, then they wouldn't love me. And I used to go to the mustard seed and they had a plaque on the wall that said, "We will love you until you learn to love yourself." And I used to think, that sounds so good in theory, but you don't know me. And if you knew me, then you wouldn't love me, right? So now I'm in this really bad predicament, and I believe that God made me the way that I am. Right? If God didn't want me to cheat, and he didn't want me to lie, and he didn't want me to steal, he wouldn't have made me an alcoholic, but he did, so therefore I am, right? And it's like the agnostic with no hope, right? Because God just made me this way. So here I am, this absolutely hopeless alcoholic going into AA, listening to your message of hope and not believing that it's possible for me. And just thinking, well, if I eat more bread, and it's not working, right? And this is just happening over and over and over again, and my bottom is just me sitting on my kitchen floor with the Heineken, and I cannot go to work again, and I cannot do it anymore, right? And I went into detox that day, and I got on my knees, and I screamed, and it had so much profanity in it. Oh, dear God, right? And this is another thing. I don't have to hide who I am from God. It doesn't have to be like, "God, I offer myself to thee," right? It was like, "God, F you can have this. I don't want it anymore," right? And it worked, and in that moment, the obsession to drink is removed enough for me to stay in detox for the 5 days, and to get me to a meeting. And then that's not enough, right? It's not enough. Like a prayer that I said on day 1 of my sobriety isn't enough to get me to 15 years. So what then is the work that has to go on? And I used to think it was a very like linear map, right? Like if I come in and I do these steps, then I'm going to feel better, and my alcoholism is going to be removed, and I'm not going to have these character defects anymore. And sometimes I can still find myself like shocked at how alcoholic I still am. Right? I have like 14 active years. I started actively doing the steps at 1 year sober, which I don't recommend do it sooner. But actively at 1 year sober, started doing the steps and sponsoring people almost immediately after, and going through the steps and doing so much work and dedicating my life to helping alcoholics. And I am like so messed up sometimes. And I was talking to a couple of I have 2 sponsees and a friend, and we do nightly reviews. And I was telling them, the difference now is that this stuff happens, right? Like I am very human, and I actually identified with something that you said. My sponsor asked me like a year ago, I was like in a bunch of pain about something, and she said, "Do you rely fully upon God for everything in your life?" And I'm like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm in so much pain, right? And she was like, good, like at least you're honest about it, right? Like I'm not walking around thinking like, "Oh my goodness, God, how could you forsake me?" Right? This isn't that. This is, I have self-will, and I'm not willing to do certain things, right? I look for the loopholes. I would have turned around. I had already crossed the George Washington Bridge, but if I got the out from coming today, I would have turned around, paid the bridge, went back, and ate pizza and watched Netflix. And that's exactly what would have happened. And I probably would have had to come out here next Saturday to make amends to y'all. Not probably, I'm sure I would have, actually. So I do these steps, right? I'm like working the steps, and I won't go through all of them because I know you've already gone through all of them, but 4 and 5 was like really good for me, right? Like, this action step, like that's really showing up for myself and writing, and I was like, so like I had like a lot of like pride, right? Like I actually wrote it out. You have people in AA, they had to work on the 4th step for years, right? I had done it like in a month, like just writing and writing. It was like a real crappy 4th step. I look back now, it's, I actually wrote things. I don't have my 4th step. I'll tell you a funny 4th step story, actually, since I have an hour to speak on 8 and 9. The biggest thing is somebody will find your 4th step, right? So I write my 4th step. I have like my life story. I had done that in my 1st year before I like really started doing the big book. And then I had my whole inventory. I get called, I worked on a trading floor at the time. I get called by HR, and I go down to HR, and they have my 4th step on the table at HR at a major investment bank. And I'm like in shock, right? I'm thinking like, oh my God, like who did this to me, right? I have a lot of people in and out of my house. I'm like, who did this? They had security there. I'm thinking, oh my God, they're gonna arrest me. Like they read this and they're gonna put me right in jail. You shouldn't even be out on the street, right? And they wound up having security there just to see it, because if I wanted to press charges for somebody doing that to me, or if they could help me find out who did it. And I was living with a man, I was engaged to somebody who was not well, and he had sent it in. But anyway, so like the worst thing ever that can happen to your fourth step happened to me, and I lived to tell the tale, and it really wasn't that bad, and I continued to work at that investment bank for another like 4 years. I quit the investment bank, traveled for 3 years doing step work with people in Thailand, came back to the investment bank, they took me back, worked there another 5 years. And anyway, so I don't really have any step work in my house anymore. My sponsor said that I could just shred it all and then I'll remember what needs to be remembered, right? Very, very sidebar story. Anyway, so what's up, Troki? Welcome to the party. So I do my fourth step, and it's really not that great, right? Like I actually had asked my sponsor a couple of years ago, like how she let me get away with such a bad fourth step. I had written things like, oh, I'm resentful at Jen. Why? Because she's a bitch. And then like in the fourth column, like, where am I selfish, self-seeking, frightened? I write, I am not compassionate of the fact that she's a bitch, right? Like that was the best I had. It was the best I had, right? Like this fact that like maybe I lack some compassion for your shortcomings. And I asked my sponsor like why she let me get away with the fourth step that was so lacking, and she said that it was the best you've had. And Wally P talks about this, right? Like you have so many character defects clogging like this pipe. You don't need to get all the character defects out in order to have like this relationship with God. You just need to get some of them out, right? So that you can have some type of pathway. And then the rest of the steps, and we have, thank God, right, step 10, where we get to keep working on those things, right? And as long as we're keeping some type of pathway. So this idea that like you have to go into 4 and 5 and have like this complete like drainage of everything and get everything. And if you forget something, you're definitely going to drink. And if it isn't perfect, you're never going to make it. That's not true. That's not what my story is, right? My story is that I went in as willing as a dying can be and as honest as I possibly was able to be at that moment. I didn't think I had any fear going into my fourth step, right? Like I'm totally delusional. And I just had to do the best that I could with God's help, right? And be as honest as I was capable of being to another human being. And from that launching point, God was able to like launch me into this other dimension that I didn't even know was possible, right? So you talk about like the peeling of the onion, right? Like I don't even know what I don't know, but I can't get there unless I get rid of the stuff, right? That already exists. So get rid of the crud. That process is still there for me, right? There's still a lot of crud. Like the pipe's not fully clean. And it probably will not be in this lifetime, and I probably am not reaching enlightenment in this lifetime, and that's okay because my troubles, my character defects, the things that I go through, that my struggles are the most valuable asset I have now. It's not everything I went through when I was drinking can now help me to help another alcoholic. That's true, but everything I went through yesterday that was painful and hard and I went and got me closer to God can help someone now, right? So it just keeps going. It's not like that historical like trouble. It is the trouble, right? And then 6 and 7, and I'm glad, we had like a little debate at the beginning about, not a debate, but like who was going to do 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, and I was thinking, oh God, don't give me 6 and 7 for an hour, right? It's hard. You did a phenomenal job. It's not easy to do. 6 and 7 for me were always like so elusive, right? Like they're like these like weird God steps, right? And I like action. So I like writing. I like calling my sponsor and talking about my writing and my character defects. And then I like going into 8 and 9, right? And I kind of would like for a long time would leave like God out of it, right? So like write an inventory, have that moment of clarity where I'm able to see the truth of myself because I have somebody reflecting that to me and I can see it, right? And you know when you do an inventory and I would be so resentful at somebody, so resentful, feel like I could never ever have any relief. And my sponsor says one thing that resonates as true, as so true, as the truest thing that has ever existed. And I can breathe again? All right. And then I can't wait to go make the amends because I just want to be free from it, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go make this amends. So I'll get back to my experience with skipping over God in that because that didn't go well. But I'll talk about 8 and 9 as my experience from when I went through the steps initially. So the 8th step, right, this list that they're talking about, right, we're making a list of the people we had harmed, that's my 4th step list, right? So that's the list of people that I was resentful at because I hurt all of them. It's my harm son list, or sex inventory, whatever you call it. And I took those people and I put them on index cards. On the index cards, I wrote the name of the person that I had to make the amends to. I wrote what I had done to them in very short, like 5 words, right? Like, cheated on him and stole his money, right? Or whatever it was. And then I wrote how I would get in touch with them. I got sober before social media, so your kids nowadays don't know how easy it is for you. I had to search for people, but I'm sure you still have to search for people nowadays, but it was hard then. And I didn't have, and became willing to make amends to all of them. Like, I didn't write 3 lists. I hear people talk about this. They write 3 lists, a list of who they're willing to make the amends to, who they're maybe willing to make the amends to, and who they're not willing to make the amends to. If you go through the steps accurately, like if you go through the steps and really understand how screwed you are, right? If you really, for me, I really understood how screwed I was in the first step, how powerless I was, how that it was inevitable that I was going to drink again if I did not turn my life over to God. Inevitable, without a doubt, right? Like, I could not stay away from a drink for a minute, and once I start drinking, I cannot stop. Like, I am so screwed. I am as screwed can be. If you really understand how screwed you are, by the time you get to the 9th step, there was no, like, I'm not willing, right? Like, I was willing to do anything. I was terrified, but willing. So I have like this brilliant idea. Like, I can do anything with the index cards, my sponsor tells me, right? Like, I can do an easy one first or a hard one first. The only thing was that, and I always had to consistently be working on an amends. The only stipulation, the only like thing she told me was my father had died a few years prior of cirrhosis of the liver, and that I didn't have to rush him. But everything else had to be done, right? I actually did an inventory with KDP. I did 12 resentments in one sitting as like a 10-step. I had to make all 12 of those amends in 1 week, right? Like, that's how quick that goes. So like 1 amends a month, or like make an amends and then rest on your laurels for a few weeks. Like, that's not the experience that I have with the people that I've worked with, thank God. Right, and there's a guy named Joe C. from Queens, and he says that if you meet somebody who is relapsing or really struggling in AA and says that they've gone through the steps, the truth of the matter is they probably stopped at step 9.5, right? So make a couple amends, feel really good, and I have this experience, you feel really good from the amends, and then stop, right? And they talk about it in the 9th step, right? That's where they talk about resting on our laurels. So anyway, so I now have all of these index cards. And I will say also that when I came in, so for those 9 years that I was in and out of AA, I would look at the steps and I would be like, step 1, check, step 2, check, step 3, check, like I was doing them in my mind, right? Step 4, check. Step 9, I was like, hell no, every single time, right? Like, there is no way. I am so scared. So I am like a really violent alcoholic. I will fight anybody because I am so consumed with fear, right? I am so consumed with looking stupid, with being embarrassed, with not being respected, like huge. These are huge pride character defects for me. So the idea of like going and apologizing to people for things that I have done is completely outside of my wheelhouse, right? Like, it is not something that I want to do. Like, quite the opposite. If I had done something where I owed you an amends and I saw you, I would hide, right? Like, I avoided going on the Staten Island ferry for like 7 years because I would be trapped with people that I owed amends to. I have like literally jumped into bushes to avoid people that I have to see. I did this in sobriety. I actually knew that I had to make an amends to somebody a few years ago because I walked into a bodega, I saw somebody, and I turned around and walked out, and I'm like, I just jumped into the bush, and I got like 12 years sober, right? So if you're avoiding somebody, you may owe them an amends. So anyway, so this goes against like what I naturally want to do, right? I don't want to find you and make amends. It's terrifying to me. So now I have this stack of index cards, and I decide, I'm so faithful, right? I was so faithful. I was like, I'm just going to shuffle the cards and then pick, right? And I'll let God choose who I'm going to make the amends to. So the first one I pick, I had this job, and I'm a chronic absentee, right? Like, I cannot show up for work. This is why I couldn't hold jobs for long periods of time. So during the year that I worked there, first of all, I got hired and then took off the first 2 weeks. I told them that I had strep. So I didn't even show up for my first 2 weeks of work. And then after that, I probably took off at least 1 day a week. And they kept me, right? Like, they were so good, they kept me. They kept trying to help me. for much longer, but I couldn't see that at the time. And there was a guy the HR guy, who had lent me $100 right before they fired me. So when he fired me, I went back to my desk and I was like in this bullpen and I'm crying and I'm like throwing my shit into a box and I'm like making a big deal about it. And probably everybody is sitting around going like, hey, you never show up to work, right? Like, see ya. But I'm like making this big scene, and then I have this idea, right? Like, well, he shouldn't have lent me the $100 and then fired me. It's his fault, right? Like that's like what I was saying at the bar that night, you know? Like, this guy's a dope, what a dope, right? And so this is now the first card I pick. And I don't want to make this amends, right? And the way that I want to make this amends, if I have to do it, if I absolutely have to do it so that I don't have to drink anymore, then the way that I want to do it is I want to meet him at a Starbucks. I want to wear a baseball cap and sunglasses, and I want to like push an envelope of cash across the table and run, right? Like that's what I want to do. And my sponsor tells me, so the ninth step is fun, right? It's like the step where I get to like put on my sneakers and actually go out and clean things up. But there's like this other part of it where it's the first time that I'm really not going to run the show at all, right? So I am not allowed to make the decision about where we meet and how we do it and when it happens. So the phone call to him is, hey, I'd like to meet you. I have something to tell you. Where and when works for you, right? And to allow other people to make decisions and not do what I feel is comfortable. So this guy then tells me that he wants me to meet him at the office at 12 o'clock on a Friday. It's like the worst case scenario for me, right? I now have to go into this office in the middle of the day and see him like under fluorescent lights. Like it's the worst case scenario, right? And I am absolutely terrified. I am terrified. So I'm at work. I probably went down, I used to smoke a lot. Probably went down and smoked like 100 cigarettes and called my sponsor. I like leaned heavily on my sponsor back then. I still do. I probably called her a million times, like so nervous. And I'm finally walking over and I have like sweat marks. I swear they're like down to my hips. They're so big. And I had curly hair back then. It was like a big frizz ball. Right? I was like a hot mess. I was eating cake all the time. I was like a mess. And I had just like been going through the steps for like 2 months, right? Like I have the light of God showing, but it's bright, you know? There's like some stuff going on. And I'm shaking and sweating and I'm so nervous. And I call my friend Maria and she said, Sabrina, nobody can hurt you. The damage is already done. God is with you. And as I'm walking, and I remember I had this spiritual advisor, and she used to say that the first instrument was the drum, right? Because it mimics our heart. And it mimics our footsteps, right? So it's boom, boom. So I'm walking, and I feel like my heart beating fast, and I hear my feet tapping, and I'm just thinking, nobody can hurt me, God is with me. Nobody can hurt me, God is with me. Nobody can hurt me, God is with me, right? And I'm just going in my sweaty, frizzy, messy self, right at 42nd Street. Nobody can hurt me, God is with me. And I go in there, and I'm shaking, and I'm so nervous, and I give him the money, but I thank him. I thank him so much for keeping me employed for the year. I apologize for not being a good employee. I am so grateful for everything that he has done for me, and I'm sorry that I made his life hard. And he starts crying a little, and he says, are you making an amends to me? And I said, I am. And he goes, oh my God. He's like, I drive handicapped alcoholics to meetings on the weekends, and they're always in the back of the bus talking about how they're making amends, make amends. He's like, and here you are making an amends to me. And I'm like, oh my God, like is that odd or is that God, right? I used to say slogans like that. That's like what I thought in my head. I'm sure I'm like, this is God. And he's crying, and he then tells me that I have restored his faith in humanity, right? And I said to him, I'm like, do not let that happen, right? Like, I am not a representative of like how good humanity is. Like, I'm just some 27-year-old kid that does not want to drink anymore, my sponsor will not work with me if I don't make this amends, right? Like, that's all it is. And in that moment, right, that like shuffling of the cards and that like I'm going to have faith that God is going to lead me exactly where I need to go in order to be able to continue on this journey, he did that. Right, if I had chosen my mom as the first one, like my mom who was like, you weren't that bad, it's okay, I love you no matter what, like maybe it wouldn't have been the boost I needed to say, you know what, I can do this, right? Me and God can get through this. I had to go through like a really terrifying one that had an amazing outcome in order for that to happen. That's my story, right? But it never would have happened if I directed it, if I made all of the decisions about it. And I went home, and I always talk about this. I went home, and this incredibly frightened, angry girl, this little girl who is like unsocialized, does not get along with anyone. I used to sit in AA and give people the finger from across the room if they looked at me funny. I thought everybody would like, right? They were all like out to get me. Like, and they'd be like, keep coming back, you make great coffee, right? Just this like broken woman all of a sudden is being fixed. And I don't even know how it's happening. Right? I don't even know how it happened, right? Like, I don't even know. And there's a guy in a story, and he always says, like, as sponsors, we're not responsible for giving advice and telling people what to do because we don't know where people are broken. Only God knows that, and only God can fix that. And in the process of going through the steps as outlined in the big book with a sponsor who didn't take my alcoholism personally, who just took me through and kept me on track and kept me close to God, all of a sudden God was able to get in and fix things that were broken that I didn't even know were broken. And I went home, and I don't even know how this started. I went home, I was listening to the White Album a lot at that point in time, and I put on Blackbird by the Beatles, right? Blackbird singing in the dead of night. And I just started spinning, I swear, like arms full out, spinning around my living room because I had never in my whole life felt that free. Never. So this thing that I was so terrified to do that I swore I was never doing, that I only did because I understood the nature of my alcoholism and how severe this situation was, and that I was going to die. I was in critical condition if I didn't absolutely do this, and I had a hardcore enough sponsor that absolutely would not have sponsored me if I didn't do it. I went into a situation that I was terrified to do, had a friend tell me, don't worry, God's got you. And I went in, and that guy knew exactly what I was doing and cried and made me have faith in this program and in God that I was being taken care of, and I was able to go home and feel freedom. Now, the danger of resting on your laurels and stopping at step 9.5 is right there. That's enough, right? I could have just been like, this is awesome. It's enough. Awesome, right? I could have like go and talk about 9th step at the meetings, right? They used to call me Tigger. I had like lots of energy. I'd be like, everybody should do 9th step and men's are awesome, right? Like, fucking awesome, go do it. Don't be scared. But then I was like terrified to do the next one, right? So it becomes this like, I get like how you can stop, right? Because it's not because that one went so well. Like the next one's like a whole other like hurdle of a million stories of how this is not going to go well, right? And if you I sponsor a lot of women. Like a lot of people like, I'm going to make amends and they're going to shoot me in the face, right? Like we have like really irrational fears. They're not going to shoot you because you stole $20 from their house when you were 14. Like that's not rational. And all of the amends are like that. I could tell you a million stories, right? The 9th step it's an amazing step to speak on because they're all like that, right? I had people tell me that they never wanted to see me again. I had people hand me so much shit back, and they were right. They were right? That was another thing I learned when I was going into the amends. Like I say what I need to say, and I wrote out my amends and spoke to my sponsor about it. I didn't go in with paper, but I was very clear on speaking with my sponsor in order to make sure that I didn't go and place blame, right? Like my amends are never like, well, I did this because I was so hurt that you did this, right? It's never that. It was never like go in and let them know what they did that forced me into my bad behavior, right? It was never that. It's always all mine. And I would discuss that with my sponsor before going in. But the deal is that I say what I need to say and then I shut up. And then other people are allowed to talk, right? And that's hard for me. Like I love like digging holes. You ever like talk so much like where you're like, oh God, I'm so deep, I don't even know how to get out. That's like my specialty. So to go in and be like concise and to the point and direct. And I had people then turn around and be like, well, you know, you missed a few things. And I had no defending myself, even if they're wrong, which they never were, right? Because their perspective of what I've done is true and accurate and their experience, and it's valid. And I was not a good person when I was drinking, and I am not a good person at times when I'm not drinking. So, and you got me thinking about a good story. So I have anger issues, right? I've been arrested for assault numerous times, felony assault in Miami. I love beating people up. I'm a big girl with a big mouth. And I am super, super violent when I am drinking. Like so violent when I am drinking. I will hurt you. And I actually, one of my methods of control was watch me, don't let me get so drunk, right? It's like the worst job to get with a violent alcoholic. I'd be like, watch me, don't let me get so drunk. And then I would have 2 beers and you would try to stop me and I'd like punch you. So that method of control didn't work. They don't write about it in the big book, but there you go. And I don't have like terrible anger issues in sobriety, right? Like these in early sobriety, right? Like some of these things get removed, right? And they talk about that. So, and we can make a lot of like concessions, right? Well, I yelled at that person on the subway, but I didn't punch them in the face, so like I'm winning, right? And one of the traditions talks about how the good can be the enemy of the best, and I can like live in that as well, right? Like, but I didn't get so angry as I used to, right? And I said earlier that I was like kind of skipping over this God thing, right? So I'm not like asking God to remove these character defects. I'm just like in this action and like spinning around my apartment to the Beatles, right? And feeling like really invigorated by the action. And the truth of the matter is that God is in there, right? Because you can't continually go out and make amends and continually write inventories and stay close to your sponsor and go through this process without God. Like me and of myself, that's not possible. But like actually consciously getting on my knees and asking God to help me with these character defects I am not doing. And these things keep coming up. So like the same stuff keeps coming up, right? I always feel like God's like smacking me like, boom, boom, wake up, silly. And one of these times, so I'm not like as angry as I used. I'm not getting arrested for felony assault in sobriety, right? But I'm like giving the finger to people at the meeting, right? Like I'm not like cured of my anger issues. And I have about 2 years sober. So now at this point, the obsession to drink has been removed. I'm sponsoring other people. I'm on fire. I'm like that like new big book on fire, like preach it to everybody and tell everybody how stupid they are and talk about like coffee makers dying and like just right. And I'm like on fire, with like all of this stuff. And I have business cards made and they have a sunflower on it. And it says my name and my number, and I just am at all the meetings, and I'm like handing out my business cards. I'm looking for newcomers. So I used to call it like newcomer hunting, like real aggressive. And newcomers are like this when they go through the big book, by the way. So have compassion for it. Remember who you are, because I get that, right? Like I had to go through that, and like you have to go through like the wildness in order to be like, oh, okay, like that maybe doesn't work, and let me calm down a bit. But like that fire is not bad. Right? I was also doing tons of general service work, right? Like that fire fuels. But anyway, so I'm at this meeting. It's a Saturday night meeting in Astoria. I'm like handing out my business card with my sunflower to everybody. I'm sure I had shared something fabulous. And I go outside and my friend Maria is out there and she's like arguing with this other woman. And I roll up and I'm like, yo, what is going on here? And her friend comes up. All of a sudden it's this whole thing where I'm being held back. I'm like, F you, why don't you go drink, punch me, I dare you to punch me. Like I just wanted her to punch me, and I will kill you, right? Like I just want you to touch me, let her touch me, right? And I'm screaming, she's walking away from the church and I'm screaming, just go drink, right? Like I am like the epitome of a sobriety. You want me to sponsor you? I look exactly like the sunflower on the business card, right? Like I am just a good representative. And we go to the cafe after, we go out to eat after. I don't even call my sponsor. I am like fueled, right? Like I am on fire. And we go to the cafe and all of the men are impressed with, all the unwell men, right, are impressed with my anger, right? Yo, we're gonna get like closed circuit TV at the meeting next week. We're gonna we'll sell tickets. Sabrina's gonna win. My money's on Sabrina. And there's so much ego in that for me, right? Because being tough and being strong is a value that I think is important at that point, right? Like be tough, not weak. Weakness is bad, right? Being soft, being forgiving, not good. Like that's not what I want to be. I want to be tough. I want people to think that I would win in the fight. And I call my sponsor that night and I didn't even do an inventory. I tell her what happens and she tells me that I owe an amends. And I'm like, there is no way. I am not making an amends to this woman. There's no way. She started with me. I was just coming out of the meeting. I was looking for sponsees. And I have a dream that night. It's like a beautiful church. This church is beautiful. It's like beautiful stone. And I have a dream that night that I am holding her hair and smashing her face up against the church. And I woke up and called my sponsor immediately and was like, I will make the amends, I'll do anything. Because in that moment, I don't want to be who I am. Like, I don't want that to be, right? I don't want to be 2 years sober, trying to carry the message of this program and like of the miracle. I don't want to be the person spinning around my apartment to Blackbird dreaming of smashing people's faces against church walls. And I say I'll make the amends, and I have to call. I don't know this woman's number, but I know her friend, and I call her friend, and I'm like, oh, I wanted to make an amends. And she said, well, I'll have to call her and see if she'll even talk to you, right? And I'm like, right? Like, another inventory to write, fine. So I just wait. Like, I'm like, oh, nothing's going to happen. Like, this is whatever. And she winds up calling me, and I make the amends to her, and it's fine, right? It's nothing like pivotal. I find freedom in the amends, right? Which is good and important, and it's all I can see in that moment, right? I make the amends, and she says thank you, and we get off the phone. She doesn't make an amends back to me. We don't have like a heart to heart. We're not like hugging and crying and telling each other how much we love each other. Nothing like that. Very simple. Now, I have a very limited view. This is all I see, right? But it's enough. It's freedom. So we have a fundraiser like a couple of months later, and I'm at a church like this, and I'm standing with a couple of friends, and the woman walks in, and she's like beelining to me, and I'm like, oh no. She's gonna punch me. And I'm really not that tough. I'm like big, and I have a big mouth, and I don't know how to fight. So like if you tried to fight me, you would probably win, especially without a drink in me. And she asks to speak to me, and I go outside, and I remember I say to my friends, I'm like, if I don't come back in 5 minutes, come and find me, you know, like I'm gonna be dead in the alley. And she takes me outside, and she says that she has been in and out of AA for like 15 years, and she had never worked the steps, but me calling her to make the amends gave her the inspiration to work the steps, and she found a sponsor and started doing that. And I'm like, oh my God, right? Like, so I don't even know what I don't even know, right? And I don't even know in the amends process, like, I think I'm going out to heal myself and to be free from myself, right? All I care about in a very limited view is my freedom. Right, like my going home and playing the Beatles and spinning around and feeling free and not being scared anymore and feeling closer to God so that I can go and sponsor people. But what I can't see is a bigger freedom that happens for other people, right? The freedom of, I don't know, right? Like maybe releasing them from the burden of having to be angry at me anymore, right? Maybe releasing them from the guilt of whatever, I don't know, right? I don't even know how God works, but I know that there is something bigger than what I see. And that's why I keep coming to AA at 15 years sober, and that's why I keep making amends, even though I'm still terrified to do them. They're almost harder now because it's like the stuff I did while I wasn't drinking like an hour ago, as opposed to like, wow, sorry I did that when I was 16, I was super drunk, right? Like that's like a little bit easier to swallow sometimes than like, hey, like at 15 years sober, an hour ago, I totally crushed you, I'm sorry, right? But I keep doing them because I know that how God is working in my life and how God is working in the lives of others, I don't even know. But if I'm not where I'm supposed to be and I'm not doing the things that need to be done, then I will never know the miracles, never, right? And I've had so many times where I don't want to show up to something and I go and something amazing happens, right? Like the miracles aren't going to come knock at my door, the sponsees aren't going to come knock at my door, the boyfriend's not going to come, right? Like I have to like be out in the world doing things in order for these miracles to happen, and I have to, for me, as to the best of my ability, to be right living, right? I haven't had anger since that night at the church, like real anger, like that rage, that blackout rage. And I didn't even know that I didn't have it until like 5 years later. And I was talking to my friend, and I'm like, I haven't felt rage like that since that night at the church. And we were actually at a step workshop a few years ago where like this woman was talking about like the bing bang. I don't even know, I can't even, but it's like while I'm like working on this thing, God is like removing this, right? So while I'm like busy like, you know, making amends and trying to get closer to God and like all of this stuff is happening, like God had removed my anger issues without me even knowing it, right? Like one of the biggest problems I had, it took me like 5 years to even be like, wait, where'd it go, right? And it went in my willingness to own that I had it, right? Now it still exists for me, right? My anger is still there. I believe that the beast still lives in me. And if I let up on the spiritual action of this program, that I will be probably literally bashing somebody's head into the side of the church at some point. Like, no doubt in my mind. Like, it is not gone forever. That is still there. And I have a million character defects that aren't removed and that do exist. But life beyond my wildest dreams, I can tell you a million things that I just got back from a 9-day trip to South Africa. I'm like some girl that has never seen a giraffe outside of the Bronx Zoo. I'm gonna fall down, sloppy ass drunk from Staten Island. I quit my job. I did step work with alcoholics in Thailand for a year and a half. I have a really good job. I'm allowed to be around children. I have like a million things I can tell you, like awesome life beyond my wildest dreams. I do not bash people's heads into the side of churches. Life beyond my wildest dream, right? Like life beyond anything I could ever imagine. Having the courage to go and own who I am. I will say for the 9th step, apologizing and making amends, forgiveness was always something that I viewed as weak. It's an old idea and it's weak, right? I always viewed it as weak. So like being tough and fighting is strength. Bowing down, making amends, taking ownership for wrongs done, forgiving people forgiving people who I believe have wronged me, weakness, no doubt. In the process of going through the steps, those old ideas get changed, right? Being able to be vulnerable and soft is a strength for me that I can still struggle with, right? Like I still want to be like tough and dominant all the time and like have everything in control. This step would not have worked for me. I wouldn't have gone home and played Blackbird by the Beatles, and I wouldn't continue to be making amends if it was a groveling. If it was a like bowing down and crawling to people and like prostrating myself and begging for forgiveness, this wouldn't work for me. The reason why this works is because it's the first time in my life, by the time I get to the 9th step, it's the first time in my life where I am holding my head up high, I am standing tall, I am owning the things that I've done, and I am not begging anybody for anything. My God is taking care of me, I am safe and protected. It is the first time that I actually have strength, right? Like I am tapped into a power that allows me to own who I am with complete humility in those moments, right? And to think that some people create these 3 lists and have a list of people that they're never willing to make the amends to. How, like I do this also, right? In the loophole, right? Like, oh, I'm not gonna come. I think he has it covered. I'm not gonna come to the meeting, right? Like we all have our loopholes, so I'm not saying I'm exempt from it. But how much do we shortchange ourselves because we're scared, right? What is it? Like fear says, you shouldn't pass this way, and pride says, right? It's like fear and pride, right? Whatever, what is the quote? You know it. And I can get stuck in this, right? Like, no, I'm too scared, or I'm too big, I'm too grandiose to like actually do these things, and then I shortchange myself and I don't even know what is possible. So the 9th step is good, and I would have said I did say for a very long time that the 9th step was my favorite step. Absolutely my favorite step. It is a step where I understood steps 2 and 3 so much more in the 9th step than I ever did sitting in a million 12-step meetings, reading them over and over again, right? Like I understood so much of how I was being taken care of and how big my God was and how I was safe and protected in God's loving embrace. I understood that so much in the 9th step than anywhere else. It was the most impactful step ever. It means nothing if I'm not getting on my knees and asking God to remove those defects of character. It means nothing if I'm not getting up in the morning and spending time in my morning routine and praying and meditating and asking God to go through my day. Without God, I am just an inventory amends-making machine, right? Harm you, apologize, right? And then that is what it becomes. It becomes an apology and not an amends. It's not then an alteration of my behavior so that I won't do it again, right? It is then just me groveling. It's the same thing as when I was drinking. I'm sorry I did that. I'll never do it again, I promise. But without God, I'm definitely going to do it again because I'm driven by self over and over again. So all of these steps are all good, and I needed to do 4 and 5, and I needed to do 8 and 9, and I need to continue doing them in order to clear this wreckage and to clear the gunk that is blocking me from God. But without then asking God for help, it's like game over, right? My God is forgiving, and I will say this doesn't need to be done perfectly, and I know that for a fact because I haven't done it perfectly. And I actually, for like the past 6 months, I always had a really big fear of dating for like a few years, like really big fear of dating, like really low self-esteem, not believing that I'm good enough. I'm just gonna help alcoholics and be alone forever, and I'm good with that, like it's cool, you know, and like kind of like convinced myself of this, and I start dating, and that's like super vulnerable, right? But then I'm like totally consumed with self. I don't even have time to sponsor people anymore. Like I just have my sponsees that are already well, and I'm not taking on any new ones, right? I'm busy. And it's okay, right? Like there's space in there for that as well, right? And in the pain, you know, in the pain of stuff that I've been going through, like I have so much more compassion for the newcomers that I work with, right? That I had kind of forgotten, like, oh my God, just stop crying about this shit already, right? And then I'm like crying all the time, and I'm like, oh, I have such compassion for the tears. So like I think everything happens for a reason. As long as I don't break away from God and I don't break away from the rooms, like there is room for error. I'm human, right? And like we get to keep going through this, and it is not linear. It's just not. I would like to tell you that I have 15 years sober, and everything is great, and I work really hard, and like all this stuff is removed, and you too can live like me. But what I will tell you is I have 15 years sober. I haven't felt like drinking since I started doing the steps out of the big book, not once. That I never feel hopeless. I never ever feel as if the problems aren't going to go away, ever. I always know that it's going to change, that all I need to do is get a good night's sleep, get up in the morning and pray, and then I get a new day, right? That I can get on my knees at any moment and start over, and that God is there waiting for me and will help me. I never feel hopeless. I never feel like I need to kill myself in order to get rid of the pain. That's huge, right? So like room for like human error, sure, for sure. Just keep going back, right? Keep coming home. And I did make the amends to my father. I'm going to end with this one. So the last amends, I do all of my amends, all like a bazillion of them. There weren't that many, like 40. And saying Blackbird by the Beatles, I now have a habit, like I've created a thing, and I talk about it everywhere, right? I said, Blackbird by the Beatles, spin around freedom. And I get home from my last amends, and I don't spin in freedom, and I am instead crying. So I had hated my father my whole entire life, almost my whole life. My father was an alcoholic. He was full of rage. I became exactly like him. He died of cirrhosis of the liver 5 days after September 11th. I watched planes crash into the buildings from my house. And then my father died 5 days later. And I sat in every bar and told everyone who would listen about how sad my life was. It was devastating, and I hated my father so much for everything he had done. And I had such a palpable hatred for my father that I couldn't even talk about him when I first got sober. I just hated him so much. I could not see that he suffered and that he was sick and that he was an alcoholic just like me and just like you, that these people in AA that I now loved were just like my dad. I could not make that connection at all. Just hated him. And so I do all of these amends, and then I start crying because I'm ready now to make these amends to my father. And I go, how do you make an amends to somebody who's not here, right? It's hard. I at that time thought it was really hard, right? Like the amends to my mom was easier because she saw me. She saw that I was better. You know, I think had like some hope that I could see in her eyes, and it's easier then. But my dad never saw me sober. I was stealing from my father on his deathbed. I was stealing drugs from him. I was stealing money from him. I was terrorizing him at the hospital. I was yelling at nurses. My father used to cry in the bed while he was dying because I was so selfish and so out of control. And here I have this hatred for him, and if I make this amends to my father and I don't have the hatred, then what do I have? Because that's all I've had. So I don't really want to get rid of the hatred. And I tell my sponsor that, like, at least I feel something for him. Like, what? I don't have it. I can't build new memories with him. I only have what I have. And I don't necessarily want to get rid of it. And she said, well, how big is your God and how much faith do you have? Fine. So I go on this, I book a meditation retreat, a silent meditation retreat, which is very hard for me. I like talking, and a lot, love talking. And I go on this meditation retreat and it's silent, and I sit there on Saturday night and I write this letter to my father. And again, it's not like incredibly impactful. There's nothing like, like the heavens don't open, and I like signs also. I generally don't get them. So I write this letter and just fine. I don't know. I might have set it on fire, something. But it's done. Check it off the list, right? I'll get to stay sober another day. Here I show up with my willingness. And anyway, that week I do get signs. They're just not when I want them. So I go to Starbucks, and I'm sitting in Starbucks waiting for my friend, and this guy walks in with his daughter, and his daughter's 7 years old. And he's so loving and attentive to her. He's rubbing her back, and he's leaning down to talk to her face to face. And he asks her what she wants, and she wants hot chocolate. And he's so kind and loving. And I'm looking at them, and he reminds me of my dad. He reminds me of my dad, this really loving man with his daughter. And in that moment, I'm able to love my father and see my father for another side of my father that I couldn't see with all of the anger. My father was a really good father. My father lived for us. I could not see it when I was consumed with this anger. Yet I had such a small view that if I didn't have the anger, then I would have nothing. And that wasn't true, right? By breaking through that anger and allowing God to take the anger away and forgiving myself, I allowed myself to forgive my father and see him as a human being who was also sick, just like us, just like me, but was very loving and very kind and very attentive as a father, and it opened up this whole new thing. So, and I have a very loving relationship with my father now. I think my father is so happy. I think he is just so happy. And I cannot wait until I see him again, and I believe I will, and I don't know, whatever, right? I have to believe that, And then maybe we'll play Blackbird and spin around. I don't know. But I guess maybe the whole thing with this is, have faith that God is taking care of you. Trust that you don't see everything. Trust that there's something bigger going on than your view can show you. That's my experience over and over and over again. There's something bigger going on, and I just can't see it, and it's okay. And I can tell you a million amends stories where I didn't get what I wanted when I made the amends, and years later, a miracle happened, and I'm ow, it's just not in my time. I'm on the path of right timing. I just don't know what that is, right? But do I have faith that I'm being taken care of? And the good thing about doing this over and over again is that then becomes part of it. Now it's just a working part of the mind. I know that God is taking care of me because he always has. I believe that God is true because I know that he is, because he takes care of me, right? It becomes a truth the more you do it. It is ingrained in my being, so I don't question whether or not it's going to work out in the end. I know it's going to work out in the end because it always does. But you have to have the experience, you have to have fear, walk through the fear, have courage in order to get there. People with courage aren't people that lack fear. People with courage are people who rely upon God to walk through the fear. So who do you want to be? And I ask myself that, do I want to be a person of fear, or do I want to be a person of courage? Well, if I want to be a person of courage, then I better invite God in. Thank you.
Everyone, let's thank Sabrina one more time. And we will break for 5 minutes, and John T. will be up to speak next. Thank you.